My name is Agnes. I am 75 years old, and I am a survivor. Just 3 days ago, my daughter, Eleanor, and my son-in-law, Martin, locked my husband Henry and me in our burning house. It was a clear, cold night. The kind of night where the stars feel close enough to touch and the air smells like the end of summer. But all I remember is the smell of smoke and the heat that was so intense it felt like it was trying to cook me from the inside out. I heard Henry gasp, a ragged, awful sound, and his hand slipped from mine. "Hold your breath," he whispered, a final command, but the words were stolen by the flames. He was trying to save me, even in his last moments, but I couldn't save him. I don't know how I got out. I remember breaking a window with a small fire extinguisher, the glass shattering like ice in the heat, and falling out onto the wet grass. The paramedics told me I was lucky. They said it was a miracle. But a miracle feels like a lie when the person you've loved for 50 years is gone, and the one who took him is your own flesh and blood. I'm in a hospital now. They've given me a new name, Jane Doe, to protect me. I am safe here, for now. My daughter and son-in-law think I am still unconscious, that I will either wake up with no memory or die from my injuries. They don't know I heard everything. I heard Martin's voice on the phone, a voice so calm and cold it could have been a machine, and the words he said that finally made everything clear. The hospital room is quiet. The antiseptic smell is sharp, and the machines around me beep a steady, hollow rhythm. But inside, my mind is screaming. Just a few hours ago, I lay in this bed, my throat raw from the smoke, my body aching with a pain I didn't think was possible. The nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, said I had a visitor. Eleanor. My heart ached, a deep, physical pain that had nothing to do with the burns. I thought, just for a moment, that she was here to apologize, to cry, to grieve with me. But she didn't. She stood there, her face a mask of false concern, talking to Martin on the phone. "The fire started in the library. Looks like an electrical issue. The official report will be a tragic accident," she said. I feigned unconsciousness, my eyelids heavy, my breathing shallow. Then Martin's voice came through the phone speaker, a low, triumphant whisper. "The house is gone. The evidence is gone. We are finally free of this. Your grandparents' death certificate was signed this morning." I felt a cold dread so powerful it almost made my heart stop. Grandparents? My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. Eleanor's grandparents, my parents, died peacefully in their sleep years ago. This didn't make sense. But then I realized Martin and Eleanor had a son, my grandson Leo. They had told him I was his grandmother. But who were the grandparents Martin was talking about? Then the terrible truth began to seep into my consciousness. This wasn't just about Henry and me. This wasn't a sudden act of evil. It went back further. The worst part is the truth behind Thomas's death, the truth about my younger brother who drowned in the lake 25 years ago, the tragedy that broke my family and changed everything, the accident that was never an accident at all. I thought I knew the people I loved. I thought my life was a perfect, well-ordered book of memories. But it wasn't. It was a lie, a carefully constructed house of cards built on a foundation of betrayal and murder. And now, as I lie here, half dead, I have to find a way to make the world see the real Eleanor, the monster who hid behind my daughter's face for so long, the woman who murdered not once, but twice.
The past, as they say, is a foreign country.
I lived there for so long, in a place bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, a place where the scent of coffee and Henry's pipe tobacco was the perfume of home. It was a world I had believed in, a world where the floorboards of our old Victorian house creaked with the rhythm of happy lives, not hidden secrets. The memories come to me now not as a comfort, but as ghosts. They taunt me with their perfection. 25 years ago, our lives were a gentle, flowing river. I was in my early 50s. Henry, my Henry, was a successful architect with a laugh that could fill a room and a heart big enough to hold the world. He was a man of quiet strength, a steady hand to hold through life's small storms. Our home was our sanctuary. I loved to garden, and in the summer, our yard was an explosion of color and life, with roses climbing the trellis and hydrangeas a sea of blue and purple. Henry would sit on the porch swing, sketching designs in his notepad, and I would bring him a glass of iced tea, the sound of the ice cubes clinking like a small happy song. And then there was Eleanor, our daughter. She was our everything, our only child, the light of our lives. She was in her early 20s, a whirlwind of creativity and passion. Eleanor had a wild, bright mind and a talent for art that we nurtured with every fiber of our being. Her paintings, scattered around the house, were full of vibrant colors and bold lines, reflections of her spirit. We were so proud of her. We told her she could do anything, be anything. Henry built her a studio in the backyard, a small shed with a big window to let in all the light, and I would bring her fresh-baked cookies, trying to bribe a few minutes of her company away from her canvases. Life was simple then. Our days were marked by small, perfect moments. Waking up to the smell of Henry's freshly brewed coffee, the sound of Eleanor's favorite records playing from her room, the clinking of my gardening tools in the shed. We had traditions, Sunday dinners with roasted chicken and all the trimmings, summer vacations to the same little cottage by the lake, and Christmas mornings that were so bright with laughter you could forget the cold outside. My brother Thomas was a part of this picture too. He was my younger brother, my only sibling, and a free-spirited artist like Eleanor, though his passion was for sailing and the sea. He would visit often, his infectious laughter and salty stories filling our home with a different kind of joy. He and Eleanor were close, sharing a bond over their artistic pursuits and their disdain for the conventional world. He called her my little tempest, and she would call him the sea dog. I remember one evening, the three of them, Henry, Thomas, and Eleanor, were sitting on the porch sketching. Henry with his precise architectural lines, Thomas with his fluid, almost wild drawings of waves and ships, and Eleanor with her bold, abstract strokes. It was a picture of perfect harmony. But that was all an illusion, a beautiful, comforting lie I told myself for decades. I was so wrapped up in the warmth of our life that I didn't see the cold corners. I never noticed the cracks in the foundation of our perfect family. I never questioned the shadows that lurked just beyond the golden light of that perfect past. The stage was set, the characters were in place, and the tragedy was waiting for its cue. And it came in the most painful and unimaginable way. The summer of that year was perfect, the kind of perfect that feels like a cruel joke in retrospect. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of pine, and the sun sparkled on the surface of our lake house. It was a place of pure joy, a haven where the worries of the world felt a million miles away. It was supposed to be a special week for just the three of us, Henry, Eleanor, and me. But Thomas called, full of an excitement that was contagious, and asked if he could join us for the last few days. He was working on a series of paintings inspired by the water and wanted a last chance to absorb the essence of the lake. We were a happy quartet. We spent our days fishing, swimming, and simply being together. Thomas brought his small, well-loved sailboat, a single-masted vessel he had named the Wanderer. He and Eleanor spent hours out on the water, sharing stories and art tips. They were so alike in their creative spirit that it was a joy to watch them. Henry and I would sit on the dock, a quiet, comfortable presence, watching them with a deep sense of contentment. Then, one evening, it happened. The sky was turning a soft, bruised purple as the sun set. Henry and I were getting dinner ready while Thomas and Eleanor were out on the Wanderer. We had just set the table when a storm, an unexpected and violent one, rolled in with shocking speed. The wind howled through the trees, and the calm lake turned into a churning, angry mess. I remember Henry shouting for them to come in, his voice lost to the wind. The last I saw of the boat was a small white sail, tossing violently against the backdrop of the dark water. Eleanor came back first. She stumbled out of the woods, soaked and shivering, and her face was a mask of cold detachment. She told us the boat had capsized. She had managed to swim to shore, but Thomas, he was gone. Henry went into the storm, calling for Thomas, but there was no answer. We called the authorities, and for 2 days, search parties scoured the lake. They found him on the 3rd day, his body tangled in some reeds by the opposite shore. The official cause of death was accidental drowning. The authorities said the storm was a freak event, and the boat had likely been overturned by a sudden gust of wind. It was a tragedy, plain and simple. But even then, in the suffocating fog of my grief, I remember a nagging feeling, a whisper of something being not quite right. While Henry and I were consumed with our sorrow, Eleanor's reaction was unnervingly calm. She didn't cry, she didn't rage, she was logistical, almost eerily so. She was the one who handled the conversations with the police, who found the contact for the funeral home, who spoke with Thomas's friends. She was a pillar of strength, my Henry said, and I believed him. I told myself that her calm was a form of shock, that she was processing her grief in a different way. But in the quiet moments, I saw a flicker in her eyes, a coldness, a lack of the genuine pain that Henry and I were drowning in. When I would try to talk about Thomas, to remember him aloud, Henry would change the subject. "It's too painful, Agnes," he would say, his voice heavy. "Let's just remember the good times." His words felt like a wall, a way to bury the grief, and I followed his lead. We sold the lake house, a place that had become a monument to our loss, and moved on. The official explanation was accepted, the pain was buried, and the years became a kind of long, slow anesthetic. I convinced myself that what I had seen in my daughter's eyes was just a trick of the light, a figment of my grief. I had to believe it. I had to. The alternative was a truth far too monstrous to comprehend. I have written the first 3 parts of your story, establishing the perfect past and the foundational tragedy. Now, as requested, I will write part 4, which will introduce the rising tension and the first cracks in Agnes's perfect world. The decades that followed Thomas's death were a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Henry retired, and we spent our days in the garden, on the porch swing, and watching our daughter's life unfold from afar. Eleanor married a seemingly charming, successful man named Martin, and together they built a life that appeared to be the very picture of modern success. They had a son, my grandson, Leo, a sweet boy with a kind heart. I believed we had moved on, that the pain of the past was truly buried. But time, it turns out, is not a healer. It's just a caretaker for secrets. The first crack in my perfect world came a few months ago. It was a letter from a lawyer, one I didn't recognize. It informed me that a distant cousin I hadn't seen in over 40 years had passed away, and with no immediate family, had left me a substantial inheritance. It was a sum so large it felt unreal, an amount that could have changed our lives, or, as it turned out, ended them. Henry, who had been diagnosed with a heart condition, and I had already been discussing our will. But this new money, an extra $7 million, made everything more complicated. The news spread like wildfire, and within a week, Eleanor and Martin were at our door, not to congratulate us, but to offer help. They had always been comfortable, but suddenly they began to show an unnerving interest in our finances. Their visits, which were usually a pleasant surprise, now felt like an audit. "Mom, Dad, with your health and this new inheritance, you can't be worried about money," Martin said one evening over dinner. He had a smooth, confident way of talking that made him seem so trustworthy. "We can handle all of it for you. We've even talked to our financial advisor." He laid out a polished proposal. He and Eleanor would be granted power of attorney over all our assets. They would manage the new inheritance, our life savings, and our property. He insisted it was for our own good, to free us from the burden of financial management in our old age. Then came the bigger suggestions, the ones that made my stomach knot with a vague unease. Eleanor suggested we sell our home, the house where we had raised her. She said it was too big for us, too much to maintain. Martin and I found a lovely little assisted living community, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. It's beautiful, Mom. All the amenities you could ever want. No more worrying about the yard or the stairs. The thought of leaving our home felt like a betrayal. Every room held a memory. Every creak in the floorboard was a part of our story. We politely declined, but they were persistent. The offers became more like demands. They bought us life insurance policies, naming themselves as the sole beneficiaries, something we didn't even need. They insisted it was just in case, a responsible precaution. One evening, I walked into the living room just as Eleanor was finishing a hushed phone call. She didn't see me. "Yes," she whispered, her voice tight with tension. "It will be taken care of. No one will ever know. We will have everything we deserve." The moment she saw me, her face changed, a quick mask of concern replacing the tension. "Just talking to the bank about some paperwork for you, Mom," she said with a forced smile. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Her words, her sudden obsession with our finances, the coldness in her eyes that I hadn't seen since that summer by the lake, it all began to feel wrong. The perfect picture of my daughter, the one I had held onto for decades, was starting to crack. A new story, a terrifying story, was beginning to emerge from the shadows of my past. The unease had become a constant companion, a cold weight in the pit of my stomach. The strange phone calls, the pushy offers, the way Eleanor's eyes would flicker with an unfamiliar coldness. It was all an unbearable symphony of suspicion. I knew something was wrong, but I still didn't have proof, not until I decided to finally face the ghosts of the past. I went up to the attic, a place I hadn't entered in decades. The air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten things. In the far corner, behind a stack of old holiday decorations, was a large wooden trunk filled with memories from our lake house. I opened it, and the smell of pine and old lake water filled the air, a scent that had once been a comfort and was now a torment. I was looking for a photo album, a picture of Thomas and Eleanor smiling on the dock. I needed to see that they were once happy, to prove to myself that the darkness I now saw in her eyes wasn't there back then. But what I found was not the photo album. Tucked under a pile of old blankets, in a small, worn leather pouch, was Thomas's journal. I didn't know he had one. Henry and I had packed up his belongings, but this must have been hidden. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was his, a flowing, artistic script I remembered so well. I turned the pages, reading his words, his hopes, his fears. I read about his struggles, a gambling problem he had been hiding from me for years, and a crushing debt that had spiraled out of control. And then I got to the last entry, dated the day he died. The words were frantic, scrawled with a desperate energy. "Eleanor found out about the debt. She has her own. The bank is threatening to foreclose on her new studio. She said she could help, that she could make it all go away. But she wants my share of Grandma's inheritance. I told her no, that it's supposed to be split between me and Agnes. We argued on the boat. She was furious. She said if she can't have the money, no one can." My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The next sentence was a cold, sharp blade to my soul. "She's going to stage an accident. I have to get off this boat. I have to find a way to warn Agnes, but she won't listen. She's too blind to her daughter's true nature." The journal entry abruptly ended. My hands were shaking, and my entire body was numb. The accident was no accident. It was a murder. But the horror didn't stop there. I found an old folded letter at the bottom of the couch. The envelope was brittle and yellowed, addressed to me. It was from a friend of Thomas's, a man named Robert, who had been at the lake house that weekend. The letter was dated 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral. It read, "Agnes, I have to tell you the truth. I couldn't at the time. I was too afraid. But I saw it. I was fishing at the far end of the lake, in a small cove. I saw Eleanor. The boat didn't capsize. She pushed it. She hit Thomas with an oar when he tried to climb back on, and she held the rope until the boat went under. Then she let go and ran back to the house. I was so scared, Agnes. She looked so cold. I thought she would come after me. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I have a lot to lose. I have to go now, but you need to know." My world shattered. The memories I had held so dear, the perfect picture of my daughter, my family, it was all a monstrous lie. Eleanor, my sweet, kind daughter, had murdered her own uncle over money. And Henry, my husband, had known. The way he had always changed the subject when I brought up Thomas, the way he had helped Eleanor with the funeral arrangements, it all clicked into place. He hadn't been in shock. He had been protecting his daughter. He had been complicit in the cover-up of a murder. My grief for Thomas was now overshadowed by a chilling, terrifying rage. The daughter I thought I knew was a stranger, a murderer. And my husband, the man I had trusted with my entire life, had been hiding a terrible secret from me for a quarter of a century. The truth was revealed, and it was a horrifying, soul-crushing weight. I wasn't just a survivor of a house fire. I was a survivor of a lifetime of lies. The discovery of Thomas's journal and the letter from Robert had turned my world into a desolate wasteland. My grief for Henry was now mixed with a terrible, bitter betrayal. He wasn't the loving, steadfast husband I had believed him to be, but a complicit secret keeper, a silent accomplice to his own daughter's crime. With the horrifying truth laid bare, my fear turned into cold, hard determination. They had killed my brother, and now they were trying to kill us. I couldn't let them get away with it. I had to expose them. That same day, Eleanor called. Her voice was saccharine sweet, full of feigned concern. "Mom," she chirped, "I'm so worried about you and Dad. You both need to get away, to relax. Martin and I have booked a special family trip to a beautiful cabin. It's so isolated, just a perfect little getaway. Just you, me, and Martin." The hair on my arms stood on end. I had seen the getaway they had arranged, the one they had found for us in the woods, far from any neighbors or help. This was it, the final act, the perfect trap disguised as a loving gesture, the murder plot that would be staged as a tragic accident. I knew what they were planning. They would get us to the cabin, far from help, and then, who knows, maybe they would poison us, or stage a fire, or a carbon monoxide leak. My mind raced with the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. But I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a witness. I pretended to be overjoyed. "Oh, Eleanor, that sounds wonderful," I said, my voice shaking with an emotion I hoped she mistook for gratitude. Just the thing we need. I needed to get evidence. The journal and the letter were proof of the past, but I needed something to convict them of the present. I decided to turn my smartphone into my secret weapon. Before we left, I went into my home office, a place where Henry and I had spent so much of our lives together. I took a small black box from our safe deposit box and placed a letter inside, sealed and addressed to my grandson Leo. It contained a full account of everything I had discovered, along with a note telling him how much I loved him. If I didn't make it back, he would know the truth. I also took my phone, a simple little device, and went into the audio settings. I set it to record all calls automatically and a voice-activated recorder for any ambient sound. I turned the phone on silent and placed it deep inside the pocket of my coat, the one I knew I would wear on the trip. I feigned an illness, a bad migraine, a convenient excuse to stay in the cabin that evening while they went into town for dinner. Henry, his heart already frail, was completely oblivious. He was just so happy to be with his daughter. He was tired from the trip and went to bed early. I lay there, listening to the small sounds of the woods outside, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for them to make their move. The fire started in the early hours of the morning. It began in the back of the house, in the living room where the fireplace was, and spread with a terrible speed. The smoke filled the cabin, a thick, suffocating cloud that stole the air from my lungs. I tried to get to Henry, but the door to his room was locked from the outside. I knew it. The heavy thud of a metal chain being pulled into place from the outside, that wasn't an accident. I tried to open the door, but the heat of the fire had already warped the frame. Henry was trapped. Through the window, I saw her. Eleanor, standing in the moonlight, her face a pale oval, illuminated by the growing flames. She wasn't running for help or screaming for me to come out. She was just watching, a cold, calculating expression on her face. Then, as I stumbled through the smoke-filled hallway, I caught a glimpse of her and Martin talking near the fire. They were smiling. The low, triumphant sound of their voices was clear on the phone in my pocket. "The cabin is gone. The evidence is gone," Martin whispered, his voice thick with satisfaction. "We are finally free of this." I managed to reach the small emergency window in the kitchen, but the lock was frozen. I hit the glass with a small pan, and it shattered, a sound I will never forget. I squeezed through the opening, the shards of glass tearing at my skin, and fell to the ground outside. I could hear Henry coughing, a terrible, desperate sound. I pulled out my phone. I had to get them on record. I called Martin. He picked up on the third ring. "Martin," I choked, my voice raw with smoke. "The house, it's burning. You have to call for help." There was a brief silence on the other end, and I heard Eleanor's voice in the background, hushed but sharp. Then Martin's voice came through, a chilling, triumphant finality. "Your grandparents' death certificate was signed this morning." The words were a confirmation. It wasn't just us, the ones they wanted to kill. It was the entire family they wanted to erase. My Henry, my Thomas, and me. I held the phone tight, my eyes burning with tears, a horrible, sad realization. I had to survive. For Henry, for Thomas, for my grandson, Leo. I had to.
The last thing I remember from that night is the suffocating smoke, the searing heat, and the cold, terrifying finality of Martin's words on the phone. After I fell to the ground outside, I lost consciousness. It was a miracle that a neighbor, a man who lived a few miles away and was driving home late, saw the fire and called for help. I was rushed to the hospital with severe smoke inhalation and burns on my hands and face. Henry, my husband of 50 years, was not as lucky. He was gone. When I woke up, the world was a sterile white blur. The beeping of the machines around me was a constant, irritating rhythm. The taste of antiseptic clung to the back of my throat. The pain was immense, a dull throb that radiated from every part of my body. But what kept me going was not the pain. It was the recording of Martin's voice, the damning proof that lay hidden in the pocket of my coat, which had been taken from me and placed in a plastic bag. Hours later, Eleanor and Martin arrived. They were dressed in solemn black, their faces masks of forced grief. They stood at the foot of my bed, their whispers a poison in the sterile air. "She's still out," Martin said, his voice low and confident. "The doctors say she might never wake up. The smoke inhalation was severe." "We'll be the sole heirs," Eleanor whispered back, a hint of triumph in her voice. "No one will question a tragic accident. The police said the fire started with faulty wiring in the old fireplace. It's the perfect story." They were so sure of themselves, so arrogant in their evil. I lay there, my body a prison, and I listened. They planned how they would sell the land, how they would claim the insurance money, how they would tell Leo that his grandparents died heroically. I stayed motionless, my breathing shallow, my eyes closed. They had to believe I was unconscious. My survival depended on it. Then the nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, who had been caring for me, came in to check my vitals. She was a family friend, a woman I had known for years through the local gardening club. Eleanor and Martin stepped back, giving her space, a perfect show of deference. Sarah leaned close, her brow furrowed with concern. "Agnes, can you hear me?" she whispered. I had to act. I had to signal to her, subtly, without tipping off Eleanor and Martin. I began to stir, feigning a sudden violent seizure. My body tensed and I thrashed slightly, my hands flailing. I saw the look of terror on Eleanor's face and the fleeting, cold-eyed disappointment on Martin's. As Sarah held me down, trying to calm me, I managed to use my finger to trace a single word on the white bedsheet. Eleanor. Then, as the feigned seizure subsided, I traced another. Phone. Sarah's eyes widened just for a moment, a flicker of understanding that only a true friend could have. She calmly left the room, telling Eleanor and Martin she needed to get a doctor. Instead, she went to the nurse's station and called the police, requesting a specific detective she knew personally. She explained the situation in hushed, urgent tones. The detective, a man named Miller, was already on his way to the hospital to question me about the fire. When he arrived, Sarah met him outside my room. She quietly handed him the plastic bag with my coat inside. "She signaled to me," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "The phone is in the pocket. I think you need to listen to it." Detective Miller went to his car and listened to the recording. The conversation between Martin and Eleanor about staging the fire, the callous discussion about the insurance money, and Martin's chilling confirmation of my brother's murder all came through. He had enough. More than enough. He immediately called for backup. Moments later, Eleanor and Martin were in the middle of a fake conversation with me, pretending to comfort me, when two police officers walked into the room. They showed their badges and said, "Eleanor and Martin Vance, you are under arrest for the murder of Henry Vance and the attempted murder of Agnes Vance." The masks of false grief fell from their faces, revealing a raw, ugly truth. They stared at each other, their eyes filled with shock, and then a cold, desperate betrayal. "It was his idea," Eleanor screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Martin. "He told me we had to." Martin just stood there, his face ashen, unable to speak, the smooth confidence gone. They were in shock, but then, a second later, they began to turn on each other, the same way they had turned on Henry and me. Justice was coming, and it was a cold, hard, and undeniable thing. The days and weeks that followed the arrests were a blur of police interviews, hospital visits, and a profound, quiet grief. The evidence from my phone, the recorded conversation, the chilling confession, was irrefutable. Detective Miller and his team also found Thomas's journal and Robert's letter in my home office, which provided a motive and a devastating account of the first murder. The case was open and shut. The trial was a painful public spectacle. Eleanor and Martin, in a final act of cowardice, turned on each other. Eleanor tried to pin the blame on Martin, claiming he had manipulated her into the plot. Martin, in turn, produced financial documents that proved Eleanor had used her inheritance on a series of failed business ventures and gambling, and that she had been the one to orchestrate the fire. Their shared guilt was an ugly, monstrous thing, and it was laid bare for the world to see. They were both convicted of arson, murder, and conspiracy, and they received sentences that would ensure they would spend the rest of their lives in prison. The closure of the trial did little to heal the wounds. The grief was still a raw, aching hole in my chest. I had not only lost Henry, my beloved husband, but also the daughter I had known for 50 years. The woman who stood in that courtroom was a stranger, a cold, calculating monster I had failed to see. My heart ached for the perfect life I had believed in, the one that was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The inheritance, the very thing that had triggered this terrible plot, was now a heavy burden. I decided to sell the family home, a place now haunted by betrayal and loss. The creaking floorboards no longer felt like a part of a happy life. They sounded like the creaking of a rotting foundation. I wanted to start fresh, somewhere new, a place where the memories of a life that was a lie couldn't follow me. But I was not alone. My grandson, Leo, was a bright, innocent light in the overwhelming darkness. He was now parentless, a small boy thrust into a world of adult horrors. He was the one piece of my family that wasn't tainted by the greed and deceit that had destroyed everything. The courts made me his legal guardian, and I took on my new role with a fierce determination. I had failed to protect my brother and my husband, but I would not fail this boy. I bought a small house in a different town, a place with a big yard and a kitchen that smelled like fresh bread and hope. I filled it with new memories. We started a new life together, just the two of us. I showed him pictures of his grandparents, his Papa Henry and his Nana Agnes, before the darkness came. We talk about Henry's love of gardening and how he was a great storyteller. I don't hide the past from him, but I do it gently, honestly. I tell him his mother made some very bad choices and that those choices had consequences. He is a child, but he is not a fool. The story of my life had come to a sad and painful end, but a new one, a difficult one, had just begun. The scars on my skin and the deeper ones on my heart will always be there, but there is also a quiet, profound sense of peace. I gave my brother justice, I honored my husband's last request to survive, and in caring for my grandson, I am building a new life on a foundation of truth and love. The lies are gone, the villains are punished, and for the first time in a long time, I am truly free.